You've unlocked a Roundtable.
Welcome to the Lost Levels Roundtable discussion of Steve Jobs. My name's Chris. With me, as always, is Alex.
Hello.
And in our roundtable discussions, we always go into our review first, then we'll do our sign-off, and then at the very end, after the sign-off, we go into our spoiler-centric portion where we kind of just go into spoilers and give us a full breakdown without having to try to manipulate our thoughts without giving spoilers. So here's the review. Let's start off with the premise, I guess.
All right. Yeah, the premise of it is basically you're following Steve Jobs, and this movie just kind of examines his important relationships during three separate product launches. Originally the Macintosh, then the Next, and then the iMac. And so it's a movie that's broken down into three separate acts, almost very much like a play.
Yeah, and time gaps between them. They kind of go into what happens between the big launches in Steve's life.
A little bit, yeah.
And you get kind of caught up. And so we've seen a lot on Steve Jobs since his passing in the last few years. Even before that, there's always stuff about him. And then lately, there's just been a lot going on. Like, we just had a Steve Jobs movie called Jobs with Ashton Kutcher. Ashton Kutcher. I can't get anybody right.
I know. Go ahead.
With him playing Steve, and now we have Michael Fassbender taking the role, who looks nothing like Steve, but by the end you're kind of like, oh, okay, maybe later in life you could you could see him as, but early Steve, nothing like early Steve.
Way too handsome.
Yeah. So this is definitely an Aaron Sorkin script. I will say that right off the bat.
I did not realize it was Aaron Sorkin's script.
Are you serious?
Oh, I did not know he wrote it, but after you said that, it makes so much sense now.
It's totally an Aaron Sorkin script. The way that all the fast dialogue.
No, that makes complete sense.
All the conversation pieces, it feels like Newsroom. It feels like a Moneyball or a Social Network. It totally feels like an Aaron Sorkin script.
Yeah.
And that's how this movie is. I mean, like you're watching it. And I enjoy Aaron Sorkin a lot. Actually, I really enjoyed Newsroom, the show.
I had to finish Newsroom, but I liked what I watched of it.
Yeah, I just love the banter. I love the quick dialogue. It's smart. It's refreshing, and that's what you got here in Steve Jobs. Like, a lot of the conversations back and forth were just quick and to the point.
Very smart, very clever. Yeah,
and very smart, very clever, and that's what I liked about this movie. Aside from individual performances, I thought Michael Fassbender did a terrific job.
Oh my God, he was a powerhouse.
I did not realize Kate Winslet was his assistant, Joanna.
It didn't take. I did not realize it until the third act. I'm like, oh shit.
I was the same. I totally didn't recognize it until the third act. It took me 2 acts to realize that's Kate Winslet. It didn't dawn on me. Obviously, Seth Rogen looks like Seth Rogen.
It's hard not for him to look like him.
He plays Steve Wozniak in this movie, and then you also have Jeff Daniels, a Newsroom Aaron Sorkin original who rocks the Sorkin scripts like nobody's business, playing the former Apple CEO John Scully. So those are the people that really stand out in this movie, I would say, or not necessarily stand out because of performance, but just because you recognize them, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, recognize
except Kate Winslet until the third,
but still, she does such a good job, and I think that really attests to her craft as an actress.
Was this based on a true story?
This one was, yes, it was based. I'm not sure how accurate it is.
Yeah,
it feels weird that all this stuff would happen at these exact times.
Yeah, I think it's loosely based on a true story. I know Steve's widow has openly come out and said, you guys should have never made this movie. It's based on one of these other books that came out that was not really an accurate representation, or what she feels an accurate representation of Steve's life was. So it's very dramatized, and we weren't there. I don't know. There's plenty of movies out there that kind of just show everybody knows at this point that Steve Jobs was an a-hole.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the given. His genius was because the way he pushed people and got them to levels of success that they would have never fathomed because he drove them so fucking hard.
True.
and
Yes.
and it also kind of shows his limitations in that, because he wanted end to end, like,
He wanted a closed system.
yeah, he didn't necessarily want people to do stuff and be creative, even though Apple's whole entire approach is something kind of like think different.
Right.
So it was an interesting contrast in that regard. Seeing like these behind the scene conversations, did they happen? I don't know. There's better movies. There's better Steve Jobs movies that I kind of felt like. There's the one in the early '90s.
Silicon Valley.
Yeah, Pirates of Silicon Valley, which I love. I still think that's the best one that I've seen so far, and that's one of the first ones that I've seen.
I had to watch again. I watched it when I was younger. I don't think I quite appreciated it when I saw it, just because I really had not much reference for either Bill Gates or Steve Jobs at that point.
Yeah, and that takes, that kind of gives the start of like Steve and Wozniak in the basement, or I'm sorry, in the garage, and that whole like the Silicon Valley era type of thing, and like leads up to like the relationships with Bill Gates and stuff. It's a different era in storytelling of Steve Jobs' life. But it was actually one of the best, I thought. It was a really interesting movie. And Noah Wiley played Steve Jobs in that, and he did a fantastic job. So yeah, this movie kind of just focuses it on three main topics, and then from there they just that's the movie, I guess. Like, so without getting into spoilers, obviously, what you said, you mentioned Michael Fassbender's performance was really good.
Oh, I think he did a really good job.
Who did anybody else like really stand out for you?
Oh, Jeff Daniels, as always, he does a good job. I mean, Seth Rogen, actually, yeah, I'm going to say Seth Rogen did do a good job. I mean, it wasn't his usual goofy type self. He took a stab at a serious role, and I think he did a commendable job. I mean,
yeah, in all honesty, I thought that like he played Wozniak, like I thought he captured Wozniak pretty good. Like Wozniak's like this fun, interesting, like fun-loving guy. Like he wanted to give computers to everybody for free. Like he just and you kind of get that in Seth Rogen's performance. And Steve actually came out and said that he really liked Rogen's performance in interviews and stuff. So he enjoyed this film. There's other people have kind of said this movie's kind of just been trash. But it's kind of interesting to see like what people's thoughts about seeing another Steve Jobs movie is. And I don't know, like I was interested in it because I don't know why, but I watch everything Steve Jobs related. There's a documentary on TV, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll watch that. Or like an Apple documentary or something. I watch them. I get the general gist of everything now, like in terms of like the history of Apple. So I have a good gist of what like Apple is, and I've owned a couple of Apple products. We're recording on an Apple iPhone right now. So it's just an interesting history of technology through the years, and watching it through Apple's eyes has always been kind of fascinating to me. The other part that this movie kind of really touched on was his relationship with his daughter Lisa.
correct.
You see different phases of her life. I think the first act was when she was 5. Second act was like
9, and then 19. Yeah.
So the film bounces around in her life, and you kind of see her relationship with it, and his relationship with his ex-wife, or ex, I don't know if they were married or not.
Just ex-lover.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. I think what makes it interesting is Sorkin's script.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it wasn't for Sorkin's script, I think that this would have just been a bore, like no one gives a shit.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I mean, the dialogue is very witty and charming and humorous and everything, very engaging, but outside of that, there's really not much of a story arc there. I mean, other than just seeing how his relationship with these people fall apart, then come back together and everything, there's really not much there.
Yeah, it's kind of like every act touches on making sure that it talks about the current relationship between those central figures in his life.
Mm-hmm.
His relationship with his daughter, his relationship with his assistant Joanna, obviously Wozniak, John Scully, and then Andy Hertzfeld.
Yeah.
So those main people that are in his life, you kind of make sure that or the script kind of makes sure that they touch on their current status during those launches, and makes it a point to like, okay, you're gonna talk to this person next. So then you have a scene where you have him talking to Wozniak, and this is their current relationship.
Exactly.
You have a scene like with him and Andy and their current relationship. So it's kind of like watching the same thing 3 times, just in different
lenses.
lights. Yeah, it's interesting in that regard, but overall, it kind of holds up, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, because the relationships are dynamic. They do change. They do have their peaks. They do have their valleys. So I think that's important to realize from that aspect that, you know, to be successful, you're going to end up hurting people and distancing yourself from people, but that's not to say it could be the end of that. You know, you could always reconcile.
Yeah, and you're kind of waiting for those moments where like, okay, is Steve going to have an epiphany and just realize like, okay, I've been an asshole. like maybe I want to have that point. So you're kind of waiting for that to happen and him to grow as a character.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, this isn't, you know, obviously a Hollywood story. This is trying to be based on real true events and real life and the way that Steve is. So like we don't,
yeah, they can't have a lot of creative freedom in that regard.
Yeah, so you're trying to tie it down to that regard, and you're kind of just making it the best of what you possibly can given the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, what are your thoughts?
It's a fun movie. It's like I said, the dialogue's really witty and engaging, and the performances are top notch. So it's definitely something I think that's worth watching. I don't think you necessarily have to see it in theaters though. It's you could wait for it to be on Netflix or Redbox or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. Again, we've been agreeing on all these lately. It's kind of weird. But yeah, it's something that you can definitely rent. It's interesting to see this type of Steve in this light, I guess. It's nothing new in terms of that. It's not groundbreaking in terms of like you're going to learn some insightful stuff about Steve that you never knew before or anything like that. But it's just a solid Sorkin script.
Right.
And then played by great stars. Fassbender, Winslet, Rogen. Like they all do a great job in this movie. So it's solid performances all around. And so if you just want to watch something that will hold your interest for the most part.
And not terribly long, probably an hour and a half.
I think it was 2 hours.
2 hours? Okay.
Yeah. But it's interesting enough for you to watch it, and I would recommend renting it.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. So how can I reach you?
You can follow me on Twitter. My name there is Alex Sandberg, AlexSanberg, or you can email me directly at the website, alex@lostlevel.com. What about you, Chris?
You can reach me on Twitter at Calm Intensity. I'm on Instagram. Chris is Calm. And then for all of our social media, on lostlevel.com in the upper right-hand corner, you can get to our Facebook page, our Twitter page, our YouTube page. Pretty much anything that we have on social media, we're on there. So definitely check us out on that. Again, lostlevel.com in the upper right-hand corner. Thanks for listening, and hang on for spoilers, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Spoilers?
Spoiler!
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Steve Jobs spoilers. There's going to be some heavy, hard-hitting shit here. No, we know that he was an asshole.
Yeah.
And this just conveys the same exact stuff. He we knew about his relationship with his daughter. How it's...
I mean, I really didn't know much about that.
Oh, really?
You know, I mean, because Steve Jobs is just not one of those people that I really follow that closely. Like, I appreciate what he did for the tech industry, but as a person, like, I don't know, I just never really followed him that closely. He always did kind of seem like a snob and an asshole. I'm like, oh, this movie...
Yeah, but don't those snobs and assholes... Those are the people who get ahead. Those are the people who, like, are hardcore, that, like, push the limits of everything that are
like
more
Trump?
Successful. Yeah, they're like just clueless idiots. But you know what I mean? Like you have to
I know what you're saying.
You have to have like tough skin. You have to be tough in order to get to those things. You can't be kind and willing to just adapt to everything, because then you're not going to succeed.
Right. Well, I don't know. I guess I kind of like to see a similar type movie, but for Bill Gates, because I feel like he isn't quite like that. But that just could be his press being really discreet with
Bill Gates does a lot of amazing things, but in order for him to get to that plateau, he had to be kind of
I imagine.
There had to be times where he had to push the envelopes and not necessarily be what we kind of talked about in our Bridge to Spies review, a cookie cutter Captain America type of person who always does right. You know, they're gonna try to do whatever they can to get ahead, that's what makes them, you know, CEOs of these companies and geniuses, as Steve Jobs is portrayed as. And I've always been fascinated with him, so I know a lot. You know, I know about his relationship with his daughter Lisa, where he basically was just not recognizing her as his daughter forever.
Right.
Like he was just not dealing with it. And so this kind of painted that in that light, but it also gave it that sentimental feeling where he has starting to build a relationship with his daughter, where it was always kind of just this problem, and it doesn't really paint that her mom very good either.
No, not at all.
Like,
Kind of vilifies her.
it totally vilifies her, and I don't know how accurate that is in real life or not. I don't really know too much about that relationship, but it completely villainizes her. That was interesting.
Very.
Yeah, I just I don't know, man. Like,
I mean, it's weird because you through the movie, you know, he fluctuates. He's dismissive of his daughter, but then very much embraces her at just other points. But like within the same event, the very first event, he's like, "No, she's not my daughter." Blah 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 blah, and then is very proud of her and seeing what she does with the computer. You know, and very. I feel like he just kind of turns on and down, like, okay, I'm buying you a fucking house. It's just like, yeah, I'll buy you a house now. I'm tired of discussing this, you know. It's very weird transitions with him.
yeah, at the very end of the day, like, despite what his relationship with the mother was, like, she was always wanting more money for stuff, but you know, between the banter back and forth, at the end of it, he would always be like, "There's money. There'll be the money in your account by the end of the day."
Yeah. So it's like, what is that struggle for if you're just going to concede and give money?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if she's coming to you saying that she's on welfare and you're worth billions of dollars, you know, there obviously is a disconnect there that he doesn't think that it's his daughter, even though there's 94% or whatever percentage it was verified that it's probably his daughter. You know, that's kind of a shitty type of thing to look at for him.
Right. But like even...
I mean, that part is kind of true in terms of, like, we know that he had the hardships and never believing that Lisa was his daughter and stuff. So, like, what you kind of look at it like, okay, well, what kind of person does that?
Well, same person who at the end wouldn't recognize the Apple II crew and just fucking eviscerates Wozniak in front of a bunch of people, you know? He just calls him out and talks so much shit to him just because Wozniak wanted people
to be recognized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of brutal. And like, but what's interesting is you see where he's coming from. He's like, Apple is a dying company. Why would I recognize these people who are basically killing it? But at the same time, you know, they did put a lot of work in, and they were visionaries and pioneers to get to where Steve Jobs was, you know? So it's a weird dichotomy between those two.
Oh yeah, very very weird. But I loved Wozniak's line when they were fighting back and forth, saying, "I was the one that built all this shit. Like you don't build anything, you don't program any code, you don't do any of that stuff."
Right.
And yet here you are. You know, God amongst men type of person.
So why, you know, and then he has a very witty and insightful retort saying, you know, because I know how to orchestrate it all. Mm-hmm. I may not be able to do it, but I know how to put it all together to make something great.
Yeah, and I mean that really puts Steve Jobs in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. And he was the master at doing that. Like, he put all the pieces in place. All of the people in the orchestra played their instruments, but he ran the orchestra.
Mm-hmm, pretty much.
and that's how Steve Jobs made it. That's the innovation. That's him driving those people to be better.
Yeah.
So you do feel for Wozniak in this movie, and I think that's why I think Wozniak kind of likes this movie, like real life.
Yeah, could be.
Because like it does show the growing pains between them, but it shows the relationship between them was genuine. Up until like the end there, the final third act, where it's just like, dude, Steve, fucking come on, man,
Right.
recognize these people already, and he's just being Steve Jobs. No.
Yeah, exactly. It's just very bullheaded in that regard.
So yeah, anything else you guys want? You guys. Anything else you want to discuss in spoilers?
I'm not sure. Well, I don't know. This is something that was kind of amusing about. It doesn't really have much to do with the plot, but during the last act, as it were, when he's in his office and he's looking at those note cards on that light table, do you think that was supposed to kind of look like an iPhone interface? Because it was this bright light and had all these colored notes, and it reminded me a lot of like an iPhone screen. You think that was almost
Probably.
Okay.
I bet that was probably like a subtle hint towards the future of Steve Jobs, because obviously they don't cover that in this movie.
Right.
But it was, how directors like they'll set their backgrounds and they'll do stuff like that. I think definitely that was something.
Okay.
That was gonna.
I thought that was a cool little touch that they did that.
Yeah, and obviously in the script it even kind of touches on that. The failure of the Newton was the stylus, because you don't have your fingers to do everything else. Something that obviously the iPhone is capable of doing without a stylus.
Exactly.
So that was a nod to the iPhone, obviously.
I did kind of find his inspiration, I guess, for the iPod to be a little contrived, where he's talking to his daughter, it's like, I'm tired of seeing that Walkman on your hip. I'm going to put 1,000 songs in your pocket in a small little device. I felt that it was a little contrived, almost. Like, they were trying to show, like, hey, it's also going to make the iPod, guys. Remember that? Yeah.
I could see it. Yeah, it was contrived and it was definitely over the top. But at the same time, like in the script, they were talking about how Apple lost its innovation, and how they were saying like, yeah, they focused all this shit on the Newton, but then they weren't making anything else. They weren't consistently innovating like how Steve was when he was the CEO. So like for them to throw that into the script, it's showing that Steve is innovating.
Right. Okay.
Steve is looking at everyday products and trying to make those things better.
Fair enough.
So yes, very contrived, and kind of almost feels like it's forced in there. But
it felt very forced for me.
And I could see why it's in there though, because of all the other shit that's in the script.
Yeah. No, I will give you that.
So yeah, I mean, other than that, I don't really have anything else to say about Steve Jobs.
It's a fun movie to watch.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
There's definitely some better Steve Jobs stuff out there.
Yeah, and it's questionable, how accurate this is. So
yeah,
you could take everything with somewhat of a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm. So if you want an interesting, good story by Aaron Sorkin, then check it out.
Indeed.
All right, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.